8 times. Derek Walsh stood in the waiting area of Meridian Freight's corporate offices with a folder in his hands and a quiet certainty that the answer would be no. 8 times. He submitted an application to partner his fleet with one of the largest regional logistics companies in the country. 8 times. The response came back, rejected. He never complained about it. He drove back to his small warehouse on the edge of town, reviewed the rejection letter for whatever clause or requirement he might have missed, and started preparing the next application. By evening, he was cooking dinner for his 9-year-old son, Marcus, and they were sitting at the kitchen table talking about Marcus's soccer tryouts. Derek slept well those nights. He had made peace with the word no. But then came the 9th time. And on that Tuesday morning in late September, it was not Derek walking through those glass doors. It was Catherine Reeves, the CEO of Meridian Freight, and she was not looking at applications. She was looking for survival. How does a man rejected 8 times become the only person who can save a company from a $50 million disaster? Keep listening, and you'll understand not just what happened that day, but why Derek Walsh had been waiting for exactly this moment for the past 2 years. Derek's warehouse sat on the western edge of town, on a street where the industrial buildings had been slowly dying for 15 years. The concrete was cracked. The fencing was simple, galvanized steel, nothing decorative. There were no company signs, no logos painted on the side of the building, just a small black address number on the brick, and a single motion sensor light that came on when someone pulled into the lot. Inside, the space was different than the exterior suggested. There were 13 trucks, all of them maintained to a standard that made it clear every maintenance log was actual documentation rather than a checkbox on a form. The driver's office had a small coffee maker, a bulletin board with dispatch schedules, and a laminated placard on the wall that listed the company name, Walsh Logistics. Derek was in the lot that Tuesday morning, working with one of his drivers on a transmission mount. He was 52 years old, wearing work pants that had actual wear on them, work boots that had been resoled twice, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had the kind of hands that had done this work for long enough that the competence was visible in the way his fingers moved. He was listening to his driver describe a vibration in the suspension when the black sedan pulled into the lot. It was a Mercedes, the kind of car that had probably cost more than 3 of his trucks put together. It stopped with the kind of precision that comes from a driver who is used to arriving at places deliberately. Catherine Reeves stepped out. Derek knew who she was. He had seen her photograph in the industry publications and the business sections of the newspaper. Dark blazer, professional bearing, the kind of woman who had her entire schedule organized down to 5-minute increments, whose meetings started exactly on time, and whose decisions were rarely revisited once they were made. She was also, Derek noticed, the kind of woman who looked like she had not slept in approximately 36 hours. Marcus had stayed with Derek's mother that night, while Derek finished a late run up to the state line and back. If he had been there in his usual spot, sitting on the plastic chair in the corner of the warehouse with his homework spread out in front of him, barely looking up when visitors arrived, perhaps the conversation would have gone differently. But Marcus was not there. Derek was alone, and Catherine Reeves walked directly toward him with the kind of focus that came from having only one destination in mind. She said his name as a question. Derek set down his wrench and turned to face her. She said she needed his trucks, all 13 of them, and she needed them starting Monday. Derek held her gaze for a moment. It was a long moment, long enough to let 18 months of rejection sit in the space between them without being dramatized or overstated. Then he set down his tools, wiped his hands on the work cloth hanging from his belt, and asked her if she wanted to come inside to the office, because what she was about to tell him was the kind of thing that deserved coffee and a place to sit. To understand what Catherine Reeves was asking for, it is necessary to go back not to the crisis itself, but to the first time Derek Walsh had ever walked through the doors of Meridian Freight's corporate building and believed, with reasonable justification, that his application was in order. That was 20 months before the Tuesday morning in the warehouse. Derek had spent 14 years as a regional fleet manager for a company called Ashford Transport. He had started there as a route analyst, worked his way through operations management, and by his mid-40s had been managing a fleet of 380 trucks across 6 states. He handled procurement, logistics architecture, driver relations, and the kind of complex supply chain agreements that determined whether a company made money or lost it. He had been good at it. The kind of good that meant his colleagues understood he was the person to ask when something broke or when a client's demands exceeded the company's normal capacity. And then his wife, Susan, had gotten sick. The illness was fast, the kind of serious illness that does not follow polite timelines or wait for a convenient moment in the quarterly schedule. It required someone to be present. It required someone to pick Marcus up from school when the treatments made Susan too exhausted to drive. It required someone to make dinner and help with homework and sit by a hospital bed at 3 inches the morning and hold a hand that had become smaller and more fragile than it had any right to become. Derek had requested a leave of absence from Ashford. His supervisor had said yes, offered extended health benefits, told him to take the time he needed and meant it. For 4 months, Derek did. Susan died on a Tuesday in March. For the 2 months after that, Derek barely left the house. Marcus had stopped asking when his mother was coming home. Derek had stopped knowing how to answer any question beyond the immediate ones. "What time is dinner? Did you do your homework?" "Yes, we're going to be okay." His mother had helped. Her name was Patricia, and she was 73 years old, and she had raised 4 children, and she understood, without being told, that Derek needed structure more than he needed sympathy. She asked him one afternoon why he was not going back to work. Derek said because he could not manage a fleet of 380 trucks when his son had after-school care twice a week and his own attention kept fragmenting into pieces. She said that was probably true. Then she asked what he would do instead. Derek had been thinking about it, he said. He had a severance package. He had some savings. He had been considering starting something smaller, something where he could pick Marcus up at 3 o'clock and not feel like he was choosing between his job and his son. His mother had nodded. She had said, "Then start smaller," with the same tone she might have used to say, "Pass the salt." Derek bought his first truck 6 months later with the bulk of his severance package. It was a used Peterbilt, well-maintained, with good mileage history. He spent a month on it himself, going through every system, making sure he understood exactly what he was maintaining. He started taking regional runs. He built a client base 1 contract at a time. People who knew him from his Ashford days and who trusted the quality of his work. A year in, he bought a second truck. By the end of the 2nd year, he had 12 trucks and a dispatch system he had built himself on a used computer in the corner of the warehouse. He had learned to do his own basic maintenance, to understand exactly where each vehicle was at any given moment, and to schedule himself so he could always be at Marcus's soccer practice at 4 o'clock on Thursdays. It was smaller than what he had done before. It was not what he would have chosen, necessarily, if he had been choosing from a position of fullness rather than loss. But it was real work, and it was his work. And his son ate dinner with him every night, and Derek had made peace with all of that. What he had not made peace with was the pattern. The first application to Meridian Freight had come together over several weeks. Derek had researched the company carefully. He understood their primary contracts, their regional service area, their capacity constraints. He had prepared documentation that was meticulous. Clean background checks for every driver, current insurance certifications, maintenance records for every vehicle. He had included a letter of reference from one of his long-term clients, a regional distributor who had been working with him for 18 months and who understood his operational standards. The rejection came back within 5 business days. Fleet size does not meet current partnership threshold. Derek called the company's partnership office and asked what the minimum threshold was. The person who answered the phone could not tell him. There was no published threshold on the company's website. There was no document anywhere that specified what size fleet Meridian required. He noted this, he filed it, and he began preparing the second application. 7 months had passed. He expanded to 9 trucks. He added another client to his roster, a manufacturing company that needed regular parts shipments across the tri-state region. He resubmitted with current documentation. The rejection the second time cited lack of cold chain experience. It was a puzzling reason because Meridian's primary contracts at that time had nothing to do with temperature-controlled freight. Derek had done his homework. He knew their contracts. This reason made no logical sense. He called again. He asked whether they were planning to expand into cold chain operations. The person he spoke with seemed confused by the question. No, they said. Not that they had announced. Derek added the cold chain certification anyway. It took 2 months and a substantial equipment investment. But he did it. He bought temperature monitoring systems for 4 of his trucks. He obtained the certifications. He documented everything. The third application went in with cold chain capability, listed prominently in the operational section. The rejection was about insufficient commercial credit history. Derek had been in business as Walsh Logistics for just over a year at that point. He had good payment history on his business accounts, but he did not have a years-long relationship with a commercial lender. He spent 3 weeks building that relationship. A bank manager who knew his history from his Ashford days extended a business line of credit. Derek did not draw on it. He did not need to. But he had it. He had the documentation. He had the proof of a financial relationship with a major commercial lender. He resubmitted. The fourth rejection came quickly. Meridian was implementing a new policy prioritizing partners with fleets of 15 units or larger. Derek had 12 trucks. Getting to 15 would require capital he did not have, and debt he was not willing to take on. He spent 2 months thinking about whether it was worth stretching his operation that far. Marcus was thriving. School was good. Soccer was good. Derek was managing his schedule the way he wanted to manage it. Adding 3 more trucks would mean being less present. It would mean hiring a second dispatcher. It would mean Derek himself spending more time in the office and less time on the actual work. He calculated the numbers 3 times. Then he calculated them a 4th time. The way a person calculates numbers when they are checking whether their logic is sound or whether they are simply hoping for a different answer. The answer was the same both times. Adding 3 trucks would eat roughly 20% more of his available time, and it would strain his operational margin, but he wanted to work with Meridian. This bothered him. It bothered him enough that he called his friend Aaron Cole one evening. Aaron had been in logistics for 30 years. He ran a dispatch center up north, and he understood the business from the ground floor to the board level. Aaron listened to Derek's explanation of the situation. Then Aaron asked a straightforward question. Why does this one company matter that much? Derek had sat with that question for a while. Before answering, he said that Meridian had just won a contract with a major retail corporation for a holiday season deployment. The scope was significant. The timeline would be intense. The company would need partners. And the architecture of their current fleet had what Derek believed was a load distribution problem in the western corridor that would not matter in low volume periods, but would create a bottleneck under sustained pressure. He said he believed that when the pressure came, and it would come, Meridian would need someone who understood routing optimization from the ground level, someone who had not just managed logistics, but had thought through how to distribute load in ways that maximized efficiency. He said he thought he could be that person, and he wanted to be positioned as a credentialed, verified partner before the problem became a crisis. Aaron had asked if the retail corporation was who he thought it was. Derek had said yes. Aaron had said, then you're thinking about this correctly. You're not trying to get a contract. You're trying to position yourself for a specific problem you already know is coming. That's different. The 5th application went in with 14 trucks documented, and a projection that showed the 15th truck would be added within 6 months. The rejection cited the company's current prioritization of internal expansion and said that new partnership applications were not being accepted during that period. Derek had been rejected by Meridian Freight 5 times in a row at that point. Each rejection was technically defensible. Each one had a reason that could not be easily challenged, but Derek had spent enough time in operational leadership to recognize when the reasons were the actual reason, and when they were simply the written record of a decision that had been made somewhere else. He had shifted his strategy. Instead of responding directly to stated requirements, he had simply continued building his company and continued applying. Application 6. Focused on client testimonials and fleet reliability metrics. The rejection came back with a notice that Meridian was no longer accepting new contractor applications. That was the 5th rejection, technically. But Derek counted differently. He counted every time he had walked through that building's doors with hope and walked out with a no. He had walked through the doors 5 times in person. He had submitted paperwork 6 times. He had tried 6 different approaches. He tried a 7th. This time he focused not on capacity, but on specialization. He documented his expertise in high-density, urban routing, which was a constraint in Meridian's service area. He had learned over his time running small routes that urban delivery had its own set of optimization problems. He could demonstrate competence in that specific area. The rejection came quickly. The company was focusing its new partnerships on freight with higher per-unit margins. Urban delivery work fell outside their current strategic priority. Derek had stood in his warehouse reading that rejection and had felt something shift in his chest. Not anger, exactly. More like a door closing quietly, and the sound of it closing making him aware that he had been hoping it would stay open. He called Aaron again that night. He told Aaron what had happened. He told Aaron he had tried 7 different approaches and received 7 rejections. Aaron had listened. Then Aaron had asked if Derek wanted to keep applying. Derek had said no. He said he had done what he could do. He said the logic was still sound. There would still be a problem when the holiday season came, and he would still be capable of solving it. But he was not going to spend another 18 months applying to a company that had made it clear they did not want to work with him. He said it was time to accept the answer and move on. Aaron had agreed. He had said that Derek was right, and that sometimes you could do everything correctly, and the answer would still be no for reasons that had nothing to do with your actual capability. Derek had made peace with that. It was not the outcome he wanted, but it was a clear outcome, and clarity had its own kind of peace to it. He had not expected the 9th conversation to happen 8 months later at his warehouse, with Catherine Reeves standing in front of him with exhaustion in her eyes and desperation in the way her hands moved. Catherine Reeves sat at the small table in Derek's office, with a cup of coffee in front of her. The office was not impressive. There was a desk with a computer, a file cabinet, and a window that looked out at the warehouse floor where the trucks were parked in their neat rows. She had brought documents, a contract summary, logistics projections, a timeline that was already read with deadline markers. She told Derek the story plainly, because at that point she had no energy left for anything but plainness. Meridian Freight had won a major retail contract 8 weeks ago. $50 million, 100 delivery points across the region. The first major phase deadline was in 6 weeks. Right at the beginning of the holiday season, when every logistics company in the state was running at maximum capacity. 3 weeks ago, Meridian's primary internal fleet of 38 trucks had been tied up in an unplanned facility maintenance situation, a compliance issue that had emerged unexpectedly. It had consumed resources that were supposed to be flexible. 2 weeks ago, she had secured temporary partnerships with 3 backup freight companies to cover the gap. It was expensive, but it was workable. The numbers were tight, but workable. Last Friday, all 3 backup partners had simultaneously informed her that they needed to reduce their commitment to Meridian by 40%. There were various reasons: unexpected maintenance, drivers calling out, capacity reallocations to higher margin contracts. The reasons did not matter. The result did. She had lost 40% of her backup capacity 1 week before the deployment started. Meridian could theoretically fulfill 75% of the contract volume with internal resources, and what remained of her backup partnerships, 75% was not enough. 75% was a material breach. 75% was grounds for contract termination and significant financial penalties. She had spent the weekend calling every logistics company within 300 miles. The market was completely saturated. Every company with available capacity was already committed to holiday season work. There was literally no capacity available anywhere at any price. Monday morning, she had been sitting at her desk with her CFO and one of her operations supervisors, a man named Tom Harrison, who had been with Meridian for 14 years, had walked in with a file. He had put the file on her desk and said, "Before you spend all of Meridian's reserves on another panic solution, I think you should call Derek Walsh." Catherine had opened the file. It was Derek's 7th application, the one she had rejected with the notification that she was not accepting new partnership applications. Tom had written a note on the file, rejected 3 months ago. But if you need someone who understands high-density routing under extreme time pressure, this is the person you need. Derek listened to all of this without interrupting. When Catherine finished, he asked her one question. "How much completion percentage do you need to avoid a material breach?" She said, 85%. Derek was quiet for a moment. He was looking past her through the window at his trucks. Then he said, 13 trucks on a rotating schedule with optimized urban routing could probably deliver 90% of your volume. It depends on what your load distribution looks like and whether I have true autonomy on route planning. Catherine had felt something shift inside her chest, the first thing she had felt in 6 hours that was not panic. She said, "I would need Meridian personnel riding along for oversight." Derek turned to look at her directly. He said, "No, that would slow things down by approximately 8 to 10% per run. Real-time GPS access to every vehicle provides transparency that oversight cannot match. An extra 150 pounds per truck is additional load you'd be paying fuel cost to move. You don't need someone watching. You need visibility. That's different." He said it not unkindly, but with the kind of straightforward certainty that comes from someone who had already thought through the problem and had already calculated the answer. Catherine said she wanted to apologize for the 7 rejections. She wanted to say that he was right, that she had been wrong, that she should have recognized his value. Derek set down his coffee. He said she did not need to apologize. She had been within her rights to make whatever partnership decisions she believed were best for Meridian. What he needed from her now was not an apology. What he needed was a commitment to a genuine operational partnership for the duration of this crisis, not a transaction. A real working relationship with clear expectations and mutual communication. He said he would need the rest of the afternoon to think about whether he wanted to sign on to that. Catherine had understood that this was not a negotiation. This was Derek Walsh setting the terms, and Catherine Reeves accepting that she did not have the leverage to change them. She had gathered her documents and left. Outside, she sat in the Mercedes with the engine off for 3 full minutes before she turned the key. Derek called his mother while Catherine was driving back downtown. His mother answered on the second ring. She was at home, and Marcus was there doing homework at the kitchen table. Derek said he was going to work through the night on some logistics planning, and he might not be home until late. Could she keep Marcus overnight? His mother said, "Of course." Derek said, "Thank you." His mother said, "Something happened with Meridian, didn't it?" Derek said yes. Something had happened with Meridian. His mother said, "And you're going to do it?" Derek said he was going to think about it. His mother said, "No, you're going to do it. I can hear it in your voice. You already know you're going to do it. You're just taking time to decide whether you want to admit it." Derek did not argue with her. After he hung up, he went to his desk and opened a notebook and began writing. He was not writing a response to Catherine. He was writing the terms under which he would agree to work. He wrote for 2 hours. He documented what he would need: autonomous routing, authority on all assigned vehicles, weekly payment on completed deliveries rather than net 30 terms, a formal provision requiring Meridian to evaluate Walsh Logistics for a long-term partnership contract if completion rates exceeded 85%. He did not ask for a guarantee of the partnership. He asked for an honest evaluation based on performance. He asked for fairness. Nothing more than that. He called Catherine at 11:47 p.m. and read the terms to her. Catherine was quiet on the other end of the phone. Then she said, "I agree to all of it." Derek said he was going to send the written version to her in the morning. Catherine said that was fine. "And Derek, before you go, I need to know something. I need to understand why you kept applying after I rejected you the 4th time. I need to understand why you kept trying after I made it clear we did not want to work with you." Derek had considered this. He said, "I knew you had a problem coming. I knew the shape of the problem. And I knew I could solve it. I applied 7 times because the logic of the situation was sound. Not because I was desperate for any work you had to offer. I did not expect the rejections to go that deep. But the logic did not change. When the pressure came, you would need someone who understood what you had built and what was broken about the current structure. I wanted to be in position to help. When that happened, Catherine had said, "You knew this was coming." Derek had said, not this specifically, but something like this. After he hung up, Derek did not go home. He set up a detailed routing map on his office computer. He pulled every piece of information he had about Meridian's delivery points, their current truck allocations, their load distributions. He ran optimization calculations. He identified constraint points. He discovered 3 locations where Meridian's current routing was technically correct, but practically inefficient. By 6 inches the morning, he had the framework for how 13 trucks could deliver 90% of Meridian's volume. In the required timeline, he printed it out and set it on his desk. Then he drove to pick up Marcus. Marcus was in the kitchen with Derek's mother eating cereal and talking about a math test. Derek kissed the top of his head and said good morning. Marcus said, "You didn't come home, not as an accusation, just as a statement of fact." Derek said, "I know, I was working on something." "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "Is it something important?" Derek said, "It might be." The first week moved at a pace that required Derek to run on the kind of adrenaline that kept him awake for 18 hours at a time, and made him grateful to Marcus's grandmother for the places she could step in and cover. Monday morning, Derek briefed his 13 drivers on the Meridian contract. He did not explain why the contract had come to him at the last minute. He simply laid out the scope, the timeline, the expectation of excellence. And then he said, "This is the work we have trained for. This is what we're going to do." His drivers understood. Several of them had worked with Derek at Ashford. They understood the standard he was demanding. They understood that this was not routine work. Derek drove the first 3 runs himself, not because his drivers could not have done them. It was because Derek needed to verify road conditions, delivery site logistics, and load distribution in person. He noted 4 locations where the standard routing would create delays. He rebuilt those routes before the second day. On Wednesday, Derek identified 2 more locations that required routing adjustments. One bridge with posted weight limits that created problems for full-load vehicles. One urban delivery zone with time-of-day restrictions on commercial vehicles. He sent the analysis to Catherine Reeves along with 2 alternative routing solutions for each location, complete with fuel calculations and timing projections. Catherine's operations director read the report and said, It's good. This is actual good." Catherine had read it twice. Then she had pulled up the fleet tracking dashboard that Derek had given her access to and watched the position indicators for all 13 trucks moving across the service region. She had watched them until her eyes blurred slightly from staring at the screen. Kara, her executive assistant, had appeared in the doorway and asked if she was okay. Catherine had said she was fine. She just needed to understand something. She was watching a man who she had rejected 7 times solve a problem that her company had not even fully diagnosed. She had said, "And he's making it look easy," Kara had said. "Is that a problem?" Catherine had said, "No. It means I was wrong about him. And I'm going to have to figure out how to admit that." By the second week, Derek had identified 7 additional routing optimizations that no one inside Meridian had caught in their 6 weeks of preparation. The pattern was becoming clear. Meridian had solid capacity, but their routing architecture was theoretical. It was built by people looking at maps and spreadsheets, not by people who had actually driven through those neighborhoods at 3 inches the morning and knew where the commercial docks opened and where the urban restrictions applied. Derek was building something that was practical, something that was grounded in the actual reality of how the work moved through the streets. Catherine arrived at one of the delivery points, unannounced on the 15th day. She had told herself it was an operational check, the kind of oversight a CEO exercised on a critical contract. She parked down the street and watched. Derek was standing beside his truck talking with the receiving manager. He was going over the manifest, making notes, checking weight distribution. There was nothing remarkable about what she was watching. It was exactly what a professional logistics operator looked like, doing his job competently. The unremarkable quality of it was somehow the part she could not stop thinking about on the drive back. On the 28th day, a problem emerged that was not a routing problem. One of Derek's drivers called him at 6 a.m. and said he had been approached by a recruiter, offering a signing bonus and higher pay to jump to a competitor. The offer was contingent on leaving immediately. Derek had listened to the full details. He had thanked the driver. He had said no one could force him to stay if he had a better opportunity. But Derek wanted him to know that he valued his work and valued his commitment. The driver had said, "I'm not going. I wanted you to know someone was trying. I didn't know if that mattered." Derek had said it mattered very much. It mattered because it meant someone was trying to disrupt his operation during a critical contract. It meant the other companies in the market understood what was happening. It meant they were scared. Derek made 2 phone calls before 8 a.m. Both calls went to people he had known from his Ashford days. Both of them recognized his voice, and both of them said yes to his request before he finished explaining what he needed. By 10 a.m., Derek had 2 additional trucks and 2 experienced drivers committed to the remaining runs. He called Catherine and told her what had happened and that he had covered the gap. Catherine had said, "Someone tried to sabotage your operation." Derek had said yes. Catherine had said, "Why would they do that?" Derek had said, "Because they know what's at stake. Because they understand that if I succeed, every logistics company in the region is going to have to rethink their operational model. Because the safer option for them was to disrupt me before I could prove that their way of doing things is not the only way." Catherine had been quiet on the phone. Then she had said, "I want to apologize again for the rejections, for how I treated you when you came to the facility." Derek had said, "Catherine, I need you to understand something. I am not interested in apologies. I am interested in building something real with Meridian that lasts beyond this contract. If you want to apologize for something, apologize by committing to partnership that is based on the actual value I bring, not on guilt about how you treated me before you recognize that value. That is the apology that matters." Catherine had said, "Okay." The deadline for Phase 1 of the deployment was midnight on the 31st day. The completion threshold was 85%. Derek was driving the last truck himself. The weather had turned. A storm system had come through earlier than predicted, and 3 of his runs were delayed by an hour. He adjusted his route, redistributing stops, recalculating arrival windows while the wipers worked against rain that was coming down harder than the forecast had suggested. He called each of his drivers in sequence. He communicated the adjusted timeline. He confirmed every location. He made sure every person on his team understood where they were going and what time the window closed. His mother had called at 8 p.m. She wanted to know if he was going to make it home in time to read to Marcus. Derek had looked at his GPS, at his remaining deliveries, at the weather moving across the screen in real time. He had calculated the numbers one more time. The way he always calculated numbers when the stakes were clear. He had said, "Tell Marcus to leave Turnip awake for me. I'll be home in time." Turnip was the stuffed dog that had been a Christmas gift when Marcus was 3. Marcus was 9 now, but he still kept the dog on his bed. Derek had kept that fact in mind while calculating the timeline. The final delivery of Phase 1 was completed at 11:42 p.m. on the 31st day, 18 minutes before the contractual deadline. The completion rate across the entire phase was 91.3%, 6 points above what Catherine had asked for. 16 points above the breach threshold. Derek sat in the truck in the parking lot of the last delivery point. For several minutes before starting the engine, his hands were shaking slightly. The kind of shaking that comes after 2 weeks of sustained intensity and focus finally releasing. He called Catherine at home. He gave her the final numbers. He told her the trucks would be back in the yard by 1 a.m. He told her everything was complete. Catherine had said, "Thank you." Derek had said, "You're welcome." He drove home. Marcus was asleep with turnip tucked under his arm, the bedside lamp still on. Derek turned the lamp off, stood in the doorway for a moment, and then went to the kitchen. He sat at the table with a cup of water and the physical exhaustion of a man who had done impossible work and somehow completed it on time. Phase 2 of the contract ran for another 6 weeks. Derek worked with Catherine's team to refine the processes that were already working. He identified 3 additional optimization opportunities. He hired 2 more drivers to cover increased volume as Meridian gained confidence in his operation. By week 8, Meridian's internal fleet had finished their compliance maintenance. They came back online at 75% capacity. Derek's fleet came back to its baseline operational level. 13 trucks, 13 runs. No more. The partnership was supposed to be a crisis intervention, a temporary solution for an emergency. But something had shifted in those 8 weeks. Catherine understood now what Derek had been trying to tell her through 7 rejected applications. She understood what it meant to work with someone who had thought through a problem from first principles, who had not just read about logistics, but had lived through every variation of how logistics actually work. She called Derek 2 weeks after the contract deadline had been met. She called him on a Friday afternoon, and she asked him to come to her office. Derek said he would be there Monday morning. Catherine said, "Actually, I was wondering if you could come today, while I'm thinking about it." Derek had been in the warehouse. He had Marcus that afternoon, and Marcus had soccer practice at 4 o'clock. Derek said, "I have my son until 5, I could come at 4:30. Catherine had hesitated slightly. Then she had said, "Bring him with you." Derek had said, "You sure about that?" Catherine had said she was sure. Derek picked Marcus up from school early. He explained they were going to his office for a meeting, and Marcus would have to wait in the conference room with his homework. Marcus had said okay and gathered his backpack. Catherine was waiting in her office when they arrived. Marcus went to the conference room with a juice box and his math problems. Catherine and Derek sat at her conference table. She had a folder. She opened it and turned it toward Derek. "I want to propose a long-term partnership," she said, "structured around a 2-year, renewable agreement. First right of refusal on all mid-tier contracts in your service area. Increased compensation reflecting what your operation actually costs. And a seat on our operational advisory board." Derek had read through the terms. They were fair. They reflected genuine respect for what he had built and what he could do. Catherine said, "I also want to apologize. Not because I need to, but because it's true. I judged you based on what I saw when you walked through my doors, and I was wrong. You were right the whole time. You just had to wait for me to be capable of seeing it." Derek had set the folder down. He had said, "I appreciate that, and I want you to understand that I'm not interested in this partnership because you finally realized my value. I'm interested in it because you're willing to build something real that goes beyond transactions. That's different. That's something worth committing to," Catherine had said. Okay. They had shaken hands. Derek had gone to the conference room and picked up Marcus. As they were leaving, Catherine had asked Marcus if he had finished his homework. Marcus had said he had. Catherine had asked what his favorite subject was. Marcus had said math because, "My dad says if you understand the numbers, you understand how things really work." Catherine had looked at Derek. Derek had looked away. In the car on the drive to soccer practice, Marcus had asked what the meeting was about. Derek had said it was about partnership, about the importance of people working together on something that matters. Marcus had said, "Did you get the job?" Derek had said, something like that. 3 months later, Walsh Logistics operated 21 trucks. The growth had not happened because Derek rushed expansion, but because the 6 additional drivers from his emergency deployment had asked to stay on permanently. He had hired 2 more to cover increased volume. Derek still drove 1 shift himself every week. Not because it was necessary. It had not been strictly necessary since the 8th truck. But Derek believed, with the consistency that came from learning something the hard way, that a person who managed an operation needed to understand what that operation actually felt like from the inside. He needed to know where the roads buckled in winter. He needed to know which loading docks ran slow on Tuesday mornings. He needed to know the shape of the actual work, not just the data about the work. Catherine restructured her operations advisory board in March. Among the new members was Derek Walsh. Not as a favor to him, not as an extension of their partnership contract. She had asked him to join because he was the only person whose counsel she trusted to arrive without an agenda she could not verify. He had a habit of telling her things she did not want to hear, presented plainly and without softening. She had come to recognize that quality as the rarest thing in any meeting she had ever chaired. There are things that do not appear in any logistics application. No matter how carefully the documentation is assembled, they do not show up in fleet size metrics or insurance certifications or operational efficiency reports. They do not announce themselves in professional photographs or board presentations. They exist in the way a person responds when a problem breaks down at midnight in a rainstorm. They exist in the number of times a person is willing to walk through a closed door, because the underlying logic is sound and the work is worth doing. Catherine Reeves had spent 18 months looking at the surface of something without seeing what it was. She had seen worn boots and a small warehouse and an operation she assumed was limited by its own modest ambitions. Derek Walsh had known what was actually there from the beginning. He had simply been waiting with the kind of patience that comes from understanding that good work will eventually be recognized by people who are capable of recognizing it. In the end, Catherine was capable. It cost her 7 refusals and 1 genuine crisis to get there. It cost Derek 2 years of continued applications, and the kind of sustained focus that never wavered, even when the answer was no. But they got there. And the man she had rejected 8 times was still at the table because he had never actually left it. He had just been driving the long way around, delivering on time, and keeping the lane clear for when she was ready to pull in.